So in this video, we are going to talk about files and directories and subdirectories and all that kind of stuff. And so the first thing that we need to establish is what is the root directory, the root folder for everything on the hard drive. And so the hard drive organizes files. It is an organization. And so let's think about the root directory. The thing that at the bottom of the pile is this desk. So our root directory is going to be the desk itself. It's the farthest down we can go before we get to all of our files. And then we're going to think about all of these little circuit boards that we have laid out here on the desk. We're going to think about them as individual files because they are individual pieces. That's as low, I can't go any lower than this. This is the thing that I'm looking for. Now, in the beginning, we have a desk with a whole bunch of stuff laid out on it, but it's really not very organized because when I'm going to look for something, I've got to look over all of the material all over the desk. So it's not really a good way to organize this stuff. And so we're going to come up with the concept of a directory. And the directory is going to be, for example, this box, this little box here, this box, this big box that may be a little hard to see on the video, but we got a bigger box over here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off organizing some of this stuff so that it's easier to find. And so I'm going to create a directory called Raspberry Pi boards. And then we're going to take all of these boards and we're going to organize them inside of this directory. And so now we have a directory here and we have organized all of our Raspberry Pi things inside of this directory. So right now, if we look at this, we have a root directory, which is basically denoted, and we're going to do this in a different video, but it's a slash. So the root directory is this desk. In the desk is a directory called Raspberry Pi boards, and that represents this box. And then if I go into that directory and I do an ls, which we saw in a previous video of how to look to see what's in the directory, it's going to show me a list of all of the things that are inside of this particular directory. Now I'm also going to go and create a new directory called lenses, and I'm going to take my camera lens for the Raspberry Pi and I'm going to stick it in this box. And so now we're going to say that we have a directory called, if we look at the root directory, we have a directory called Raspberry Pi boards, we have another directory called lenses, and if we go into the lenses directory, we have one lens in that particular directory right now, or one file, and we have a bunch of files that represent these boards. If I look here, I've got another directory because this is a container, so I have a directory with a bunch of wires in it. So I'm going to create another directory called wires, and this is going to be the directory for wires. And so inside of the directory, if I open it up, I have individual files or individual wires that I can get out of that particular directory. So each of the individual objects is represented as a file, and then each directory is represented by a box or a container. Now, right now I have a root directory with 3, 4, counting the big box over here, we have 4 big or 4 containers or 4 directories. Well, now I'm looking around and I have a whole bunch of directories here and I'm not real happy with the way they're organized, so I decide that I want to go create another directory called Raspberry Pi, and inside of the Raspberry Pi folder I want to take all of the stuff that I use for Raspberry Pis and put it in the bigger folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this directory inside of this directory. So now if we look at our root directory, we have a desk, and then inside of the root directory we have a directory called Raspberry Pi stuff, and then inside of that directory we have another directory that has our Raspberry Pi boards in it, and then inside of there we have a whole lot of files. So when we're using the change directory we are saying change directory to root or slash. It puts us out here. So if we do an ls, we're going to see a directory for wires, a directory for lenses, and a directory for Raspberry Pi stuff. If we use the cd command and go into Raspberry Pi stuff, we're going to see another directory called Raspberry Pi boards. We're going to have another directory for, in there we've got other stuff. So these are individual files that are actually in. So inside of Raspberry Pi stuff, we can actually have directories and other files inside that directory. So when we're organizing the hard drive, and this is something you'll learn over time as to how Linux organizes its file system, but all you're really doing is deciding whether you want something to go into a box or whether you want it to be in that directory as a file. Eventually you're going to get down to individual files, but you can organize them in any way that you want on the hard drive.